All. I am Gordon McHenry Jr. I am so excited to have you join us in one of United Way of King County's Advancing Racial Equity Series event. Tonight is the conversation with LaTosha Brown of Black Voters Matter. I want to thank you to we got a little bit of a tech issue here going. I'm going to ignore that. Want to thank you to our program sponsors and Seattle University for partnering with us on this event. Each one of these community partners is so important to the work of United Way. And as a proud alumnus of Seattle University, it's really exciting to have Seattle U as an active partner in tonight's event. Tonight's event is going to be an enlightening conversation about advocacy, voting rights, and ways to take actions toward a just and equitable nation. We'd like to take the time now to acknowledge the land that we are on. We want to acknowledge that we in King County are located on the land on Coast Salish lands and land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. We invite each of you to take a moment to consider the land we are on at this moment, the people, the culture, and to reflect on that history and that culture and the ways in which you can take action to honor that important portion of our community, the people and the land. United Way also acknowledges that this event is taking place during the high holy day of Yom Kippur, and a recording of this event will be made available online shortly after the event for anyone who was unable to attend tonight. I want to start by informing you that at United Way, our guiding goal is to work toward a racially just community where people have homes, students graduate, and families are financially stable. We are listening and we are learning and taking direction from people with lived experiences, because those who are closest to the challenges are also closest to the solutions. We want to share these opportunities and events with you, and that's the impetus behind our Advancing Racial Equity event series. They are designed to engage our community in racial equity focused conversations and to encourage people to join us in our journey to realize a racially just community. So tonight, if you have any questions for LaTosha, please enter them in the Q&A box. And now I have the pleasure and privilege of introducing LaTosha Martin, Seattle University Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion. She was appointed to this role in September of 2017. LaTosha Martin is the inaugural Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion, and she's also a tenured faculty in the School of Law with over 20 years of remarkable service to Seattle University in total. LaTosha.
Thank you, Gordon, for that wonderful welcome. And on behalf of Seattle University, I would like to express our gratitude for this partnership with United Way and for all of the work and collaboration that made this event come together. I would also like to welcome all of you joining us through the live stream. We were invited by our partners at United Way to share a little context about our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts here at Seattle University as a local partner in tonight's event. Thank you for that invitation. So before we hear from LaTosha Brown, I will begin tonight's program by taking a few moments to share with those of you who aren't familiar a little of our diversity, equity, and inclusion story here at Seattle University. Our mission anchors and animates our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Our mission states that Seattle University is dedicated to educating the whole person to professional formation and empowering leaders for a just and humane world. That mission aligns with the efforts like those that are led by our keynote speaker tonight, LaTosha Brown. Under the leadership of our president, Eduardo Piñolver, who you'll hear more from shortly, we are reigniting our commitment to inclusive excellence, otherwise known as diversity, equity, and inclusion, taking seriously our responsibility as a university, a producer and distributor of knowledge through scholarship, teaching, creative works, and a facilitator around the robust engagement of ideas. We are educating the next generation of leaders. And as a Jesuit and Catholic university with a mission around educating for a more just and humane world, situated in the heart of Seattle, Washington, we take seriously our responsibility to be good neighbors in relationship with our community. And tonight's program is an example of how we see ourselves as being a container for truth, knowledge, and productive dialogue across difference. At the beginning of his term, President Peñalver introduced Reigniting Our Strategic Directions, a framework and an action plan for the future of our university. The fourth goal of Reigniting Our Strategic Directions is to promote inclusive academic excellence. This has become the framework for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion's work on the campus. The university's DEI work is shared and it's owned by all of us here, while shepherded by my leadership in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, where the office's mission is to foster an institutional culture where there is no dichotomy between our values of diversity, equity, and inclusion and our goals of educational quality and excellence. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd, preceded by many others, including Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor in the spring of 2020 as well, the largest social movement for Black lives ensued. We witnessed a racial reckoning taking hold across the nation and the globe. The city of Seattle was prominently featured in this movement. We at Seattle University took a moment to pause, to recenter, and re-articulate our commitment through an initiative now known as Lift SU, Action Plan for Racial Equity and Anti-Racism. It is an extension of work that was already years in the making here, with a sharpened focus on systemic racism and its material effects on our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. The historical, the cultural, and the social features of structural inequality at the heart of this country's origin stories. In concert with our president's strategic goals, the foundational work of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, action toward infusing and embedding inclusive excellence across our university, sustains. And this sustained work means that we are providing leadership on diversity, equity, and inclusion across the campus and around the city, all with the aim of harnessing the power of our differences. So yes, these are ambitious goals, and we are steadfast in our commitment to realize them. I invite you to visit our campus, to visit our website, and learn more about the work that we're doing here. But at a very high level, these efforts are intended to create the atmospheric conditions for belonging and flourishing. We have all lived through a consequential time over the last couple of years. The summer of 2020 brought upon us a renewed clarion call for racial justice, followed by a contested election season, a deadly insurrection, and an ongoing pandemic that had disparate racial and economic impacts. I recall well the summer and the fall of 2020 as I witnessed the power of LaTosha Brown's work across the South in Atlanta, Georgia, my former home, and beyond. Inspired is an understatement. This is why I'm so excited to hear LaTosha Brown tonight, because at its core, our work at Seattle University really is all about centering humanity and ensuring that the lens of upholding human value is tied throughout everything we do. Now, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce Eduardo Peñalver, the 22nd president of Seattle University. I am honored to work alongside President Peñalver. He has an ambitious vision for our university, and he understands the power of education and the importance of creating a place that is inclusively excellent for all. Eduardo?
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you for your remarks describing our efforts. And I want to thank all of you in the virtual audience for joining us. I'm the president of Seattle University and also proud to be a United Way of King County board member. And so feel equally rooted in both parts of tonight's event. Seattle University is so excited to be collaborating with United Way to host this important conversation tonight. And we like to say that we are Seattle's university. I've described this sometimes as Seattle's living room, and hosting these kinds of events which bring to the broader Seattle community and to our campus important national thinkers and leaders on vitally important and relevant issues is one way that we live out that mission and that identity. It's really my great pleasure and honor this evening to introduce our guest speaker, LaTosha Brown. Ms. Brown is a grassroots organizer, political strategist with more than 20 years of experience in the social justice and civil rights sectors. As if that were not impressive enough, she's also an accomplished jazz singer. She is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, an Atlanta-based civic engagement organization that played instrumental roles in the 2017 Alabama U.S. Senate race and Georgia's 2021 U.S. Senate race. On a personal note, I should say that her close collaborator in Black Voters Matter, Cliff Albright, was a student with me and an activist at Cornell when I was there as an undergraduate in the 1990s, and is someone I've held in the highest regard for 3 decades. Their work through Black Voters Matter has been exceptional in its impact in Georgia and beyond. If you are grateful that Vice President Harris gets to break a 50-50 tie in the US Senate, then LaTosha Brown is one of the key people that you should be thanking. Ms. Brown is a trusted expert and resource in political strategy, rural development, and civic engagement. Black Voters Matter recently launched its campaign and bus tour, We Won't Black Down, which makes stops in 12 states in the South and Midwest to engage with Black voters, policymakers, faith-based leaders, influencers, and HBCU students. Ms. Brown is also the founder of the Southern Black Girls and Women's Consortium, a collective of Black women in philanthropy, activism, and girls' work that provides resources to underfunded organizations that support and empower Black girls and women in the US South. Partnering with Ms. Brown on the consortium is Grammy Award-winning artist Megan Thee Stallion. To date, the consortium has awarded $2.2 million to 71 different organizations and special projects across a dozen Southern states. Ms. Brown is a senior practice fellow in American democracy at Harvard University's Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. Before she takes the stage, though, we'd like to show a 3-minute video about her work all around the country.
Setting off our freedom ride for voting rights. So we're down in New Orleans, we're in the historic neighborhood of Tremaine.
Everybody is a freedom rider. Even if you're not getting on the bus, you're still a freedom rider because you're on this bus on this journey that we are taking towards voting rights and liberation. What's going on, Mississippi? We are the heart and the belly of this movement. I am a freedom rider. Freedom Riders. We had about 4 or 5 folks who were either Freedom Riders or in the lunch counter sit-ins. We had local organizers. Day 3 of the Freedom Ride.
When we flex our collective muscle, we will always win. Can you imagine it? Will you fight for it?
Welcome to Rock Hill, South Carolina.
Others may crawl, but we're all trying to go in the same direction.
I believe
that we will win.
I believe that we will win.
West Virginia got something to say.
This is what it's about, and everybody making a demand that we want the For the People Act passed. So we're on our way, y'all. Next stop, going to Richmond, Virginia, and then it's on to DC.
You're not here where you're at! I am here and now pass pass the torch and pass the flame.
And now, we're in DC. We are deadly serious and laser focused as we make our demands, and we say we want the For the People Act and we want it now.
You are founders of a new nation and a new platform. Stand in your radical reimagining of the world. Thank you, Dr. Pinover. Thank you so much.
Well, welcome. Look forward to hearing your remarks.
I appreciate the opportunity. I want to say to everybody that's participating, thank you so much for your flexibility as well. I came on with a sudden illness on yesterday and unfortunately unable to join you all physically, but please know that I am completely here in spirit and really excited about this talk. Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. You know, I like to start with freedom songs because I'm a native of Selma, Alabama, which many of you may have heard of this small rural community, a population of 18,000 people in the deep South, located in the Black Belt and Alabama's Black Belt. You know, I was raised there, literally grew up hearing the stories of the civil rights movement, actually had family members who participated in that movement. You know, and I start with that song everywhere I go for a number of reasons. Number one, I want to center us even in the discussion around really recognizing that in all movements, it's our humanity that will make the difference, not our politics. It will be our politics that's fueled by our humanity. And so it's a song that often helps me get centered and grounded in that way. The second thing is that I think it's really important for us to really recognize that as difficult and as challenging as we're seeing this moment, particularly as we're looking at democracy and some of those issues going forward, that we recognize we've been here before. You know, I love to remind people that in Selma, Alabama, that on the Emmett Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday, there were only 600 people. And there were 600 people that didn't have a lot of politics on their side. It wasn't like they had a political party that was looking out for them. It wasn't like they had resources. Matter of fact, the president had called and told them, don't do this. This isn't the time right now. But what they had is they had a deep sense of their own agency, their own humanity, and had the audacity to believe that they could shift and change the world, that they, in fact, could literally make democracy be real, not only for themselves, but millions of others, and thus inspire the entire world. And they did that knowing that they would be met with opposition, knowing that they would be met with resistance, knowing that they would be met with state-sanctioned violence. They stood in the space of their humanity, and as a result, they've made change, which many of us to this day are still, well, all of us to this day are benefiting from. And so I like to start in that space of just getting us centered, of really recognizing from which we came, and to get us energized or really being reflective of where we're going. What I would like to do, even though I know many of you, I'm unable to see you right now, but I want to ask you, wherever you are, as we get started, I want you to get centered in your space. Wherever you're looking at this, just clear your mind. And I want to ask you, I do this exercise where I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And I'm going to ask you a question. Eyes closed. So my question to you is, what would America look like without racism? What would this nation look like if all human beings felt valued and respected? Now open your eyes. I don't know how many of you all have been asked that question before. Oftentimes, I always ask that question, no matter where I am. And majority of the time, probably 98% of the time that I've asked that question, there's only a few people. It doesn't matter if I'm doing it in a community, if I'm doing it at a university, but overwhelmingly, the majority of people have never even been asked that question. And the reason why I think it's really critical to even be asked that question is that my next question to you, you don't have to close your eyes on this one, is name something, anything that was brought into the physical world that wasn't first envisioned. Can you come up with anything? Probably not, because there's nothing that's ever been created or brought into the physical realm that we have not first envisioned. You know, I think about my cell phone, a pen, look at the items around you. What we literally create, we create out of vision. And the reason why I'm raising this is, as we're talking about diversity and inclusion, as we're talking about the elimination of racism, if we're really serious about that, it's going to require us to also do some imagination, to use our imagination and radically reimagine what it is that we want going forward. We should really be thinking about this question of what would America look like without racism? Because how will we ever create her, right? If we're not taking the time to even envision what would her institutions look like? What would a work day look like? What would public education look like? What would college look like? What would our places of employment look like? We have to take some time and sit in that question of what would America look like without racism, so that we can actually operate out of not just a response to a limited vision of what we've all inherited, but that what we would do is we would actually see ourselves as founders and thinkers of a new framework as we go forward. So that when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, it's not like an add-on, that we're actually talking about the full participation of all humanity, that we create a nation that actually human beings, I didn't say you had to love them, you had to like them, but felt valued and respected. At the very least, that their humanity was acknowledged and their humanity was respected. And so in order for us to get there, which is where we have to go ultimately, it is going to require us to take some time to go deep down and take the time to envision and to share with each other and to actually have dialogue around what to radically reimagine. What would this nation look like without racism? And out of that, I think it will give us a sense of how do we move forward, and what is it that, not just what we're fighting against, but what is it that we're fighting for? Given that, I just wanted to start a few minutes just giving a little bit about my background and how I came to this work and about Black Voters Matter. And so I, as a native of Alabama's Black Belt, you know, I always say as a child, I grew up, there were kind of two things that I was always pretty obsessed with. The one was anywhere I would go with my grandmother or with my family, I had to know who owned the place. If we went into McDonald's, if we went to Dairy Queen, my first question when we walked in was, who owns this? And my grandmother, I remember going into a Kmart with my grandmother and I said, Mama, I would call her Mama. I said, Mama, who owns this? She said, baby, I don't know these people. I don't know who owns Kmart. And that was always something that was of interest to me. I wanted to know who was in charge. And over the years, I've kind of developed this skill that when I go in the room, I actually scan the room to look at, you know, I'm scanning the room on who owns, who's in the position of power, who really is actually in a decision-making role. And then the second thing is I've always, even as a child, I always had this kind of interest in, I had a very, very low tolerance to seeing people use their power against other folks, to literally be able to go into the, to use their power to be abusive. Or to be mean to other people. And I was a little girl that would jump in. If I saw the big boys messing with the little boy, I would jump in. It didn't matter how big they were. You know, it didn't matter if they could beat me up. The bottom line is there was something in me that could not take seeing another person be abused or another person being treated badly or their humanity not respected. And so I think it's been the combination of those two things, of this one sense of now as I'm adult, I recognize there was one, I had this interest, this intrigue, this curiosity around power. And I also had this curiosity and this concern about the abuse of that power. or the better yet, the use of that power. And so it is that kind of foundation that over the years, as I've been as an organizer, that led me into this road of organizing. And in many ways, I've carried those two things with me, that I am very, very continuously curious about power, how do we use power, and how do those abuse power, and how can I use my humanity, my skills, my talents, and my gifts to actually stand in the way of those that abuse power, and to make sure that there's a more equitable, a fair use of that power for the advancement of all of humanity. And so one of the ways that one of the projects that turned into an organization, I often say Black Voters Matter. We founded Black Voters Matter. Cliff Albright and I founded Black Voters Matter in 2016. But it was actually years before that we have been doing this work, and through trial and error, it kind of led us on this path. You know, a turning point for me, particularly politically, was in 2000. I was in 1998. I was a young woman who was I decided to run for a public office. I ran for a state board of education, and I was running against a 12-year incumbent. I had all of the check boxes of not being the most electable person. But the one thing that I had is I had the passion and I had organizing skills. And so because of that, in a race that I was a severe underdog, ultimately the race wound up being so close that it took them 7 days before they could call the race. And so on the 7th day when they called the race, in that race, I lost by 131 votes. I accepted that I had lost a vote out of thousands, tens of thousands of votes, that I had lost by 131 votes. I called my opponent and congratulated him and accepted that that was my fate. It was later on that day that I received a phone call, a really interesting phone call. In this phone call I got from my mentor that told me to brace myself, that I was going to get a phone call from the chair of the Democratic Party, because I ran as a Democrat. And so I get a phone call at around 12:05 from the chair of the Democratic Party. He tells me that, you know, a sheriff in Wilcox County, one of the counties that I had carried and done work in, and that the sheriff had put 800 ballots in a safe, but he forgot that he had the ballots. Well, in my naivety, I was like, oh, okay, that's no problem. Since we know that the ballots were cast before the election was over, they'll just count the ballots. That even gave me a space of hope, because I was like, oh, this is the county that I won. So there's a real chance that I might be able to make this gap up. I was then told by the chair of the Democratic Party, Giles Perkins, that I'm sorry, the race was certified at 12 o'clock. And the sheriff just happened to remember that he had these ballots, these 800 plus ballots in the safe at 12:05. You know, that was one of the moments in my entire career, probably my entire life, that I felt completely powerless. I was like, wait a minute. Like, we know that these votes were cast before time. We know that someone else made a mistake. So here it is that I and the thousands of voters that voted for me are going to be punished. And that was my first face-to-face with me experiencing voter suppression. And after that time, I really understood how insidious it was, not only in where I was in my little community in Selma and in Alabama and in the state of Alabama, but throughout the South. And on some level through the years, my work is always at this intersection of voter empowerment and literally how do we eliminate voter suppression, but also recognizing that ultimately what we want is we want a stronger democracy, because we want a nation that actually moves forward and that is inclusive and has a reflective democracy. And so in that is some of the foundation of kind of what brought me to some of the work of really having a keen sense of some of the work around voter empowerment and voter suppression. And so 2016, Cliff Albright and I, who had been doing work for over 2 decades, we decided that what we wanted to do, that as organizers, as grassroots organizers, we had spent an enormous amount of time on the ground, organizing communities, oftentimes with little to no resources, oftentimes trying to figure out how could we get van money, or we needed one more van, or if we had just these resources, what we could do. And what we decided is based on our experience of the work, what we had personally experienced as grassroots organizers, what we had seen over the years happening on the ground, that what we would do is that we would create an organization that could actually help support grassroots groups. And so for a number of months, almost 10 months, he and I went around 7 states in the Deep South, and we listened to people. We went around and we talked to folks, and we listened to people to see what it is that they felt around, particularly around this question of power. How can we build power for racial justice? How can we build racial equity? What was needed? And so as we went around these 7 states, we realized that the model that we were proposing, that there was a need for it. We realized that the model that we were proposing, that literally we could tweak the model in such a way that it can really be able not only to serve the interests of that local community, but ultimately it could make democracy stronger by making those who are on the front lines doing the work, literally helping them to build capacity. And so I'm really excited to say that since that time, what we've done in understanding Black Voters Matter in our work is 3 buckets. You know, I'd like to say the 3 M's. The first bucket is money. We decided our name is Black Voters Matter Fund, F-U-N-D, and then we have a C3 BVM Capacity Building Institute, because what we wanted to do is to create an organization that can help build the capacity and build out the ecosystem of organizations on the ground that were doing this work. And so over the last 5 years, we've actually invested, directly given over $27 million in grant money to grassroots Black-led organizations throughout the South. Matter of fact, and the Midwest, the South and the Midwest. This year, we're working in 13 states directly or very deeply, but we're actually working in a total of 20 states that we've done work one way or the other, whether it's through an issue campaign or whether it's actually helping to empower grassroots groups that are in that work. The second M is movement and mobilization. We wanted to make sure that we were also not just resources, giving money, but that we were actually being able to connect and help build out a movement. So for us, our work wasn't just supporting groups that do voter registration or civic engagement work. Who are the groups that are embedded in communities that are actually doing power building works, that are literally trying to move the community forward, whether that they're doing social service, whether they're doing youth leadership development, whether they're doing work with the homeless, whether they're doing work around housing. We wanted to find a way that we really recognize that in our community, the needs are so great that it actually serves us all when we are building out and strengthening the entire ecosystem. And so the groups that we work with work in a variety of issues with a commonality, that they're all working on a power building agenda to move our community forward. And so that's a part of our work was around mobilization and movement building. And we offer technical assistance with thought partners. We also create a space for us to gather and think and to coordinate together, where the groups that we work with in each of our states, they meet monthly. Oftentimes they've developed all kinds of relationships where they're working in an environment, not like a traditional funder that sometimes creates this sense of competition, but literally we actually are sitting to facilitate collaboration. And then the third M, which is really important, is around messaging. I often say that part of what we're seeing, I think in this country, I think some of the biggest challenge around facing democracy right now, I think really is around a narrative war. That fundamentally what we are seeing is we're seeing a big lie. We're seeing information, disinformation, and misinformation that's been targeted towards communities of color and those communities that are most vulnerable, to actually be able to create this wedge of division and chaos and to create these spaces where people are either turned off from the process, are confused about the process, or literally don't have the correct information to actually know how to engage in the process. And so for us, a third part of our work has really been around messaging. How do we shift a narrative that does not center a candidate or a political party, but actually centers us, which is why we use our theme of It's About Us, that fundamentally our work is how do we center citizens and seeing ourselves in our power and literally being able to shift this paradigm that it's not about what power the politicians have. They work for us, not the opposite. the party, they work for us, not the opposite. And so in order to do that, it's going to require us to actually shape a new narrative so people can really recognize and see themselves as a center, that their voice is not a matter of, we just want you to participate. It is a matter of literally connecting people to their own sense of power, their own sense of agency. Just as I talked about those 600 people who were on the Emmett Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, over 55 plus years ago. In addition to that, part of the work that we're doing, is really around to really reshape this political landscape. As there is a shifting in the demographics in America, we have to make sure and be honest about that the current system that we have does not lend itself to pluralism, that the current system we currently have was not designed in a way to be inclusive, that system was designed to actually, the electoral process was designed to actually support and serve white men with land. And since that time, there's been an evolution of each of those of our electoral system and the voting and our voting system, but we have to do more. And so this is a moment where I want to take the last section to really talk about what I think is special in this moment. That while we are seeing the rise of white supremacy, while we are seeing a huge divide, a very politically intense kind of environment that we're operating in, while we know that there's a lot of anxiety and fear, there's a lot of misinformation and sometimes just an overload of information that is out there for people to sift and navigate through, that at the end of the day, what I really want to zone in on in this moment is that sometimes opposition brings the greatest opportunity. And so what I want to do is I want to take some time, and I have 7 points that I want to share with you all around how I think in this particular moment, this moment that has been a very challenging moment for all of us, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, this has been a very challenging, a politically intense, and a divisive political moment in this nation's history. And so my grandmother, who was a Southern woman from Alabama, would always say, baby, you got to take lemons and make lemonade. And so in this moment, we have to reflect on what are our lessons for us to learn in this moment. And so in these 7 points, I want to share with you, these are what I think what opposition can teach us and what opportunities it can raise. The first one is around what opposition does. Opposition gives us the opportunity to examine our position, for us to really examine where it is that we are. When we're saying that America's a democracy, we literally have to examine those elements of democracy that we want to keep, those elements that have to actually evolve and have to be strengthened, that this is a moment that in the midst of this opposition, that we can continue, if we only just continuously in this bantering back and forth, we will miss what opportunity this brings us. In this moment, we have the opportunity to literally create the kind of democracy that will lend itself to pluralism. We have the opportunity to create the kind of democracy that literally is inclusive. Look at the US Senate. The US Senate is not how America looks, right? That when you look at the demographics of America, the US Senate does not support that. Currently, there's not a single African-American woman. There's not, when you look at the majority are men. The majority in this nation are women, right? When we're looking at communities of color, there are many communities of color that literally do not have adequate representation in the Senate that even reflect or represent their issues. And so there's an opportunity for us to do one, to really re-examine where we are in this moment. And as we are examining in this moment, we can also start thinking about the ways we want to go forward, which takes me to number 2. Number 2, I think opposition in this moment, the opportunity that opposition brings is the opportunity. We can either retreat, but I'm going to take that off the table, or we can recommit and reimagine. And so part of what we have seen around American democracy, in many ways, many of us have been caught up in American exceptionalism. We have accepted this fact that there was this thing called American democracy, and it was the greatest in the world, and America was the most powerful and the greatest in the world, and it would self-correct. That all we had to do was get this person out of office, or this particular individual out of office, and everything will self-correct. You know, if we have not learned anything, that we should recognize in this moment that that's simply not true, that it's going to require us doing something very different. And which goes back to what I asked us to do earlier. What I asked us to do earlier when I asked you the question of what would America look like without racism? My answer to you is you have to radically reimagine what the America that we currently sit in, what it can be, that is an evolution, that is actually strengthened, that is more inclusive, that the diversity, we see that as the gifting of this nation, not as something that should be weaponized against us, but that it is a gifting. It is the blessing of this nation. And so given that, I think it's important for number two, for us to look at how can we recommit ourselves to this issue of democracy. It's easy for us to say, where there are those folks over on the other side, or there are these people who are actually working against democracy, and not really take full responsibility that in many ways we have been complicit as well. That many ways when we have not participated, or many ways when we just said, well, I'm going to vote, and many ways when we see, well, that's just happening in the South, that's not us, we're progressive, or many ways that we've seen things happen to other communities outside of our own communities, that every single time those things have taken place, they have weakened democracy, and they've sent a message, they've sent a signal, oh, it is okay. It is okay to target people because of their religion. It is okay to target people because they're Muslim, or because they're Sikh. It's okay to actually be able to kill people because of their race or their ethnicity or their age. It is okay to throw people to the side because what they have a felony conviction. Every time we have sat silently and allowed that to take root, we've also allowed that message that it's okay to be amplified. And because of that, we're complicit. The good news is that what human beings always have the power of choice. And so we have a choice in this moment to be able to recommit ourselves and to reimagine those systems that have been oppressive, to reimagine the way that we actually educate in such a way that actually does not say that one group of people have a access to history and not all of us to be able to, that our history is not valid, that we have an opportunity to reset and to re-put in place those things that we need to move forward in a way that is going to be to honor each and every one of us. The third point that I like to say is that what opposition has an opportunity to do, it makes you sharpen your saw. It makes you literally think about your strategy. It makes you think about, how do I move forward? It's a little uncomfortable. You know, my grandfather used to say, as you can tell, I am, as a child of the South and was raised by grandparents, two of the wisest people I've ever met on this earth were my grandparents. My grandfather was born in 1905 and my grandmother in 1910. And so I often reference them as I'm sharing lessons that have stuck with me. You know, as my grandfather would often say, until the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain to change, people won't change. And so sometimes it is in the discomfort of the moment that forces us to get outside of our comfort zone and to address those things that in many ways we've ignored, overlooked, or just thought that they would just work themselves out. And so we're in this moment right now that we're seeing democracy be attacked all across the board. We're seeing voter suppression laws pop up across the board. We're even seeing the highest court in this land that is currently right now considering a case that would have a tremendous impact on communities of color around gerrymandering and taking out the teeth of the Voting Rights Act. We're actually seeing an environment where it is okay to actually be able to inflict and abuse those who are in power, to take that power and abuse. When we look at what happened in Florida, where you've got the governor of Florida to actually pay $2,500, pay millions of dollars to move people, Venezuelans who had the right to seek asylum here, to just move them, not be honest, all the way to Massachusetts, as if they weren't human beings, as if they weren't people. We're seeing people who are actually going against healthcare access for people. That while we have ACA, the Obamacare that could have been expanded in deep southern states, some of the states that have the worst health outcomes, we saw governors, just because they had a particular party affiliation, work against saying, no, we don't want that, because we don't want that, because this was, even though the money is there, this was attached to a particular party, and this was attached to a Black president. And yes, race had something to play with it, had something played into it. And so as a result, we're seeing where human life is being attacked. We're seeing the massive closing of hospitals, all of those things. But then again, what is the good news? The good news, taking us to number 4, is that what opposition also gives us, it gives us the opportunity to create grace and space. That to give ourselves grace, to give each other grace, and give ourselves space. Sometimes as an activist, I want things to happen right now, right? I want things to happen, change. And I also currently feel a sense of urgency with what is happening in this nation. I'm often, grappled with what more can I do? But sometimes it is in the giving of myself and the giving of others a little grace and a little space to sit in the moment, to actually think and be reflective, to be strategic, to think about how do I develop some new relationships, that actually I see some of the most profound changes is when I'm able to give myself grace and space. I was in Israel, Palestine, and about 2 months ago, and we were going through we were in this city, and in this city, we had a guide that was telling us about some really challenging things that was happening to his community. And as he was talking to us, his daughter came and handed him 2 flowers. And while he was telling us this intense story of some of the oppression that his community was experiencing, I was looking at him and I was waiting for him to put the flower down. I was obsessed with trying to see when he was going to put this flower down. Had it been me, I think about it, had it been my grandchild or my niece, they had brought me this flower, I would kindly acknowledge it. Oh, thank you, baby. And I would have put the flower down. I probably would have put it down, put it in my hair, or even put it in my pocket. But I sat here and I watched this man, or stood there and watched this man handle this flower with so much grace as he created like this space to be able to tell us the story, but also for his daughter's gift to him. And since that time, it's been so profound to me. It's probably had it had a profound impact on me around having me to come back and look at, as I am doing this work that sometimes is very difficult, that racism is extremely traumatic, and to constantly come back and come up against issues in institutions that literally structural racism is embedded, can be it's a situation that can wear you out and make you tired. I literally had to reflect just on that one observation, that we need grace and space, and we have to give ourselves and grant that to ourselves and to each other as we move forward. The 5th thing that I will say around what the opportunity opposition brings us, it forces us to have clarity. Are we clear about what the kind of electoral system we want, what it is that we desire, what do we deserve? I think in this moment, this should be a moment that we're literally taking the time to get clarity, to radically reimagine the kind of system that we want, the kind of democracy we want going forward, and to actually have a sense of clarity of what that would look like and what will it take for us to actually have the systems so that we shift what the Senate looks like, if we have a Senate at all, if that's what we see, if that we shift what the court looks like, that we shift what when we're looking at kind of the leadership and representation all around the nation, what that looks like. But that is going to require us not only to radically reimagine, but to have clarity of what is being called of us in this moment, and what we must do to actually lay the foundation for even future generations to continue the work. The 6th thing is around what I think opposition brings us, the opportunity, is the coalition bill. What we are seeing now, if we reflect on the 2020, on the uprisings, on the George Floyd uprising, we saw the largest uprising ever in the history of this country. But when you look at the faces, it was diverse, it was intergenerational, it was multiracial, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful sight. That is the America that I see. That is the America that I desire to see in places of power, and that we literally have an electoral system and a democracy that actually respects all of those people, all of the people, whether you agree with me or not. You should have equal access to the ballot, whether you and I share the same party, whether you and I share the same ideas or beliefs. I believe that you should have equal and fair access to the ballot box. And so that's why we fight for what we fight for around strengthening this democracy. And the seventh and the final thing, as I get ready to open it up, because I would love to hear questions from you. The seventh and the final thing is what I call, it is like the foundations. I call it the four corners of foundations, and it's the V strategy. And in this V strategy, I think every single one of us that are listening to this, I think this is incumbent for us to really think about in this moment, how we are doing and holding the foundation of what I think is going to lead for us having a stronger and a more inclusive democracy. The first V is vision. There goes that vision again. I believe that we have to literally recognize how important, how critical it is for us to take time collectively, individually, within our networks and with our places of faith, with our places of work, to really spend time visioning what it is that we want to go forward, so that we're not just responding to what is, or responding to those that are literally trying to tear down or undermine this democracy, but that we're actually focused on not just what we don't want, but we're actually focusing and helping our communities to focus on what it is that we desire. What is it that we want? So the first V is vision. The second V is around voice. This is not the time to be quiet. This is not the time to be silent. Think about what happened in Germany, and think about the rise of Hitler. It were millions of people that stayed silent. And as a result, there were over 6 million people that were slaughtered, that were killed because of the complicity and the silence of so many others, that some were their neighbors, were their co-workers. They had lived among each other and lived with each other and worked with each other, right? But in that moment, their silence actually led to the rise of this dictator who ultimately wound up murdering over 6 million people in that nation. And so it is important in this moment that we recognize that our voice, your voice, is needed. As we're talking about strengthening democracy and diversity, that you yourself have a measure of power in your places of influence, whether that's in your family, whether that's in your place of worship, whether that's in your community center, whether that's in your civic your civic organization, whether that's in your garden club. Use your voice. The third V is around victory. We have to shift the paradigm of what we see victory as, that in some ways we have held in this nation that victory is a zero-sum game. In order for me to win, that means you have to lose. Instead of literally, how do we create a paradigm? How do we create a nation that really is around, we're going to have diverse ideas. We're going to have diverse political ideologies. We're going to have diverse positions. And that is okay. That's not a weakness. That's not something that should be weaponized against people. That is something that should be embraced. And so what is the kind of infrastructure, political structure that we need in place so that all of those things are taken in consideration, not necessarily weaponized against people, but we see it as part of the tension that leads to a stronger and more inclusive democracy. And the fourth and the final V, I bet you all can figure this one out. We've got to vote. We have to vote like we've never voted before. And our vote can't just be because we're coming to the table and we're voting. We have to literally see our vote and amplify our vote, which means we need to get involved. We need to get our families, people that we know, people that we don't know, involved in the process. Without being an alarmist, I'll just say that I recently facilitated a talk at Harvard, and with two of the premier, two very well-respected democracy scholars. And all of the signs, they wrote a book called How Democracies Die. And as in our discussion, all of the signs leading up to the death of a democracy, a modern democracy, that literally it's not when that is going to happen, but we're in it, y'all. We're literally in a space that this isn't about one election. This isn't just about one person winning or one party being in power. This is literally right now, we're fundamentally making a decision with our vote. If we're going to have a stronger democracy going forward, or are we going to go backwards? I believe and have the audacity to believe that there's far, far more of us that literally want a inclusive, representative, a reflective democracy than those that seek to undermine and destroy it. And if that is the case, what is going to require? It is going to require us doing those things. It's going to require us having a vision, using our voice, literally shifting how we see victory, and ultimately voting. And with that, I am going to open up because I would love to hear questions from you. I'll just end by saying, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let your voice shine.
Oh my, so powerful. And if you were with us, I'm sure you would hear lots of applause. You'd see people standing and applauding you, saying amen, and people getting ready to be called into action. So I'm so thankful. I'm thankful for your ancestors, your grandparents, who imparted lots of wisdom to you, and the wisdom you've shared with us tonight. We are going to open this up to some Q&A, and for folks who are with us, please put your Q&A in the chat box, and then one of my colleagues, Jared Erlinson, is going to cultivate those and ask some questions. But since I've got the microphone, I'm going to ask the first question, which I wrote down while I was just listening to you, and I think it probably falls in the area, LaTosha, about giving me a little more clarity. So when you are talking about all this important matters, and you think about racial justice and democracy, what is that intersection there? What is the role of racial justice shaping the democracy that you want us to be so concerned about?
You know, it's so interesting because they actually have, they're very intertwined. It's almost, you can't really have one without the other. And so it's almost a chicken and the egg in some ways, right? That you need racial justice and racial equality to actually have a fully functioning democracy, right? But you also need democracy to actually have the input of literally the input and the space for all people to actually be able to participate. And so I think what we have to do is we have to actually, you know, my grandmother again would talk, baby, you got to chew gum and walk at the same time. We have to literally be able to recognize that we're on these parallel tracks, that we're going to have to see that they cannot be connected. You cannot have a democracy in this nation and not have racial equality, racial justice. It is going to require us to actually recognize how interrelated and how interconnected they are, and that the work that we're doing, that as we are building racial policies that's for racial justice, that it strengthens our democracy. That as we literally think about voter suppression, and we think about, you know, part of, I often say, the biggest, I think the biggest betrayal of racism is that this idea that racism doesn't hurt us all. It hurts us all. You know, I even think of, and sometimes because we've seen racism, and there's been a frame in terms of white America of how racism, there's a narrative of how, one, it has led to privilege and it gives benefit. That's true, but it also takes away as well. And give me a case in point. You know, when I look in Georgia, you know, because of this racist frame on just the expansion of something as simple as healthcare, what that has led to is that's led to the closing of 8 hospitals. Now, the last I checked, white people get sick too, right? And so, and particularly in those rural communities, oftentimes they're disproportionately impacted. Those are some of the places where they need hospitals the most. But what has been the firing rod, and we've seen policies that have been designed to actually be able to impact a particular group, or racism has been the impetus of getting those policies passed, but they ultimately hurt us all. And so we have to really recognize that we're so interconnected and interdependent that we're going to have to literally fight around fight and be proactive about creating racial justice policies within our institutions, within our communities, forcing those policies that will lend itself to racial equity.
Yes, indeed. And somewhat remarkable, because you've talked about should not be a zero sum, and that the victory can't be zero sum. So yeah, we have to get to that better place in that understanding. Jared, I said I would not dominate the question and answer. So do we have a question for LaTosha?
We do. We have a few. First, LaTosha, I'll just read this comment. This is so amazing, LaTosha. Thank you so much. I feel so inspired. Comment from the chat.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I think part of in this moment, that's why I want, thank you for that comment. And I'll just say this, that in this moment, this has been a really difficult time for all of us. This has been a really challenging time for all of us. But I want to say that in those moments of great challenge, those are usually when you have the breakthrough opportunities. So I want us to look in this moment, not just around the opposition and feeling a sense of hopelessness, but we have to really recognize there's an opportunity for us to get this thing right. There's an opportunity for us to really create the kind of nation that we all have access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So thank you for that.
Our next question also involves a thanks. Thanks to Black Voters Matters, investing in local groups around the country, including the Puget Sound chapter coalition of Black trade unionists. How come we haven't seen more replication of Black Voters Matters? Am I just not seeing it? Or are folks like you, Cliff, and Stacy just so incredibly exceptional? Help a brother out with some hope. Thanks.
Let me say this. I certainly would, I love the word exceptional. I don't quite think I'm that though, but I would just say I wish I could say that I think, well, let me say this. I don't think that we were the first to do this work. I think that our work is a continuation of so many others that have been doing this work before us. And while I do think that there's a certain uniqueness in our work, I think that there's so many other groups. Part of the reason why we started Black Voters Matter is because we knew that there were other groups that were doing just like we were doing, but at a small scale and didn't have the resources, right? And so while we didn't have Black Voters Matter 25 years ago because we didn't have any money, we had the idea, we had the passion, and what resources we had, we used them in a similar fashion in terms of sharing. And so what we wanted to do is to create an organization that we could actually be more intentional about how do we get resources on the ground. There are many, many groups, I would say, that I think are doing exceptional work. And I think we all have our role to play. And so I'm really, really grateful that you think so highly of us. And I actually think we're pretty cool too. I do think we're pretty cool. But I also believe that we come from a long history in this country of resistance and resilience. That our current, if you look at our current bus tour, it is called We Won't Black Down. And the reason why we named our tour We Won't Black Down, because it was at the combination of that at the end of the day, that while we're in this racially and polarized environment where we're seeing communities of being attacked, and that in some way that we're supposed to shirk away, right, as a Black community, that what we're saying is, no, we're leaning into this long, rich history of resilience and resistance, that we literally make democracy better in this nation, that we make this nation better for everybody, and that ultimately we're going to lean into it. So we're not going to back down, we're not going to black down. We put in the combination together of coming from a strong history of the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, all the social justice movements that have come before us, the labor movement, that we see that it has been in those movements that have actually led for this country to get stronger and better and more inclusive. So thank you. There are many, but I do appreciate that.
Jared, we'll go for one more question from the audience, and I've got a couple that I can give to LaTosha as well.
All right, and they're coming fast and furious. Here's one. What's the best way that white people can support these types of programs, such as Black Voters Matters? I personally think listening to the Black community is incredibly powerful, but is there something more than listening I can do to support?
Thank you so much for that question. And let me say, at the end of the day, we are us. And this is what I mean by that. We're leading from our identity within the context of speaking to the Black community in a particular kind of frame. But let me be clear, our work is based in humanity, in the lifting of humanity. So at any moment in time, if you got on the bus, as we call the Blackest bus in America, once you got inside, you might think it's a rainbow bus, right? That fundamentally we see that our fate is tied to our white brothers and sisters, our Latino brothers and sisters, our indigenous brothers and sisters, that ultimately it is our humanity that's going to save us, not our politics. And so as a white person, I think there are a number of ways that one, I think ultimately us tapping into, and I think that there's a certain level of, we all have influence in our circles, right? And I think that there are people that you will have influence to that may not want to listen to me, may not want to hear what I have to say, but will listen to you. That is extremely powerful. Use your place of privilege, use the spaces that you're in to literally be able to share and come from your space of humanity. The second thing I would say, well, just join the movement. Our movement, the difference in terms of, I think that when you look at historically, right, the difference between I think some movements, and when I think about how I think of the civil rights and the Black Power movement and the movement that we have right now, is that our movement is not at the exclusion of anybody. Our movement is at the inclusion of all. We're saying that we're leading authentically from our space, from our come from, our experience as Black Americans, but not as at the exclusion of others. That we're saying, come on down. We will put you in a Black Voters Matter t-shirt in a heartbeat and let you hit the streets with us. But there are ways that you can support. I also say, please follow us. You can follow us online. There are ways that we actually do, phone trees, we do text banking together, we do phone banking together. There are many, many ways. We would love to have you be a part and join our movement. So thank you so much. Thank you for that question.
What a great question for an organizer. LaTosha, you talked about lifting up humanity. Song in many cultures has always been a place that helps us lift our humanity, tap into resilience. So could you tell us a little bit more about your work with Megan Thee Stallion and that work to help empower the dreams of Southern Black girls?
Absolutely. So around the same time, ironically, around the same time I started Black Voters Matter, I had this vision of creating, that's why I think visions, I believe in visions. Visions make things happen. Of creating this network. There was a report that came out from the Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative. And the report is called Unequal Lives. And in that report, it mentions of the $4.8 billion in philanthropic dollars that are coming to the South, less than 6% of those resources are going to women and girls. That's all women and girls, although women and girls make up 53% of the South. And then less than 1% were going to Black women and Black girls. My initial reaction was, I was going to go visit, I worked in philanthropy, I was going to go to these foundations and tell them what they were not doing correctly. And I just had all kinds of, I was angry, and I literally wound up having a vision. I was taking a shower actually, and I had this vision. This vision was, I could actually just, I could spend my time trying to get people to do right, or I could help lead the way. And so I decided the latter, that I would actually create a network to demonstrate, a consortium to demonstrate that we could actually lead and create something what we call Black Girl-Centered Philanthropy, that we could actually create a more empowering way of being able to lift up the work on the ground. And so fundamentally what we decided to do is I got 3 other women who are Black women in the South who are leading foundations or funds, community-based funds and foundations, that the 4 of us would get together and we would actually build this network. So in 13 states, what we have is we've got this network of activists and organizers and groups and some funders that literally what we would do is that we have this idea that over the next 10 years, we would raise $100 million and reinvest those $100 million in organizations that serve Black women and Black girls. And so I'm excited that we had our first grant cycle this past year, but we've given out a total actually of $3 million to organizations in the South, 71 this past year and 25, I think, last year. So about a total of 103, I think, organizations. But one of the exciting things, as you mentioned, around with Megan Thee Stallion, who, as you know, is she is at the top of her game right now. And she proudly She's a proud Southern Black girl. And so what we did is we launched what was called The Joy Is Our Journey. And that came out of after COVID. People were so depressed. All of us, we were think about how hard it was for us. So can you imagine how hard it was for our high school children, who literally are social butterflies? And so ultimately what we wound up doing is having a Black Girl Joy Challenge. And in that Black Girl Joy Challenge, we ask girls, because what we want to teach communities is that you always have something to give from, right? And girls, we had got all of this information that girls were depressed and they were there was a rise in depression. We said, well, we can flip that around. So we said, listen, what we will do is give you a mini grant to what idea do you have that you could actually create something that brings joy to yourself and at least 10 other people. And so that was the Joy Challenge. And in this Joy Challenge, we got remarkable ideas where the girls, we wanted them to feel generative, that in this moment that is really difficult, that you still have something to pull from, that you still have creativity, you have art, you have these ideas. And so as a result, we did the Joy Challenge. So this summer, what we did with the Joy Challenge, we took it to the next notch, because that's what we do. We take it up another notch. We had the Joy Is Our Journey bus tour, and we went to 5 states over the course of 5 weeks, where we went from state to state, and we had Black Girl Dream Villages. And then the Dream Villages, they were beautiful, you all. In the Dream Villages, they had health and beauty. They had arts and culture, where they made jewelry. We had STEM, where they did cosmetic chemistry, where they made their own bath bombs. They made their own lip balms. We had areas where they actually had, it's called the Dream Deferred for mamas and mentors. So those women who have taken care of their children or taken a job and life has just kind of gotten away from them, and they think that their dream is not going to manifest. It was like, no, we got something for you too. And so we had coaching on site, and we had entrepreneurship on site. And so we partnered with Megan Thee Stallion on our Joy Is Our Journey tour, and literally we're able to go to these different places throughout the South. And we're actually having we haven't announced it yet, so you all are the first to know, but we have a special grant cycle specifically related to mental health and wellness, because that was a deep part for us too. We had a section called a partnership with an organization called Black Girls Smile, because we're seeing these rising rates of depression within our community with Black girls as well. And so that's some of the work we're doing. Super, super excited. Thank you for asking me about Southern Black girls.
And no, powerful and so inspiring. And if we go to your website, will we find information about
You
the Black girls?
If you go to Southern Black Girls, southernblackgirls.org. If you go to my website, Miss LaTosha Brown is on there as well, but southernblackgirls.org. And we're rooting the beauty of our work is that we're rooting our work in joy. Certainly. That in the midst of all of this, we can actually be anchored in joy.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions. If you'll hang with us, yeah. Great. Jared, pick another one.
Absolutely. I'll do a quick one first. This one says, hey, maybe is there a place I can see the 7 opportunities written down? I missed a few of them while taking notes.
I don't have them on a place written down. I can re-examine. It's for us to examine. 1 is examine. 2 is reconnect and reimagine. 3 is sharpen the saw, your vision. 4 is grace and space. 5 is clarity. 6 is coalition building. And 7 are the anchors of the foundation, the 4 V's. And that was vision, voice, victory, and vote.
Man, that was great. We will also be posting a recording of this event. For those of you that would like to share it with others who couldn't be here, be sure to check that out in the next couple of days when we get it up. LaTosha, how would you describe the political landscape in the 2022 elections versus the 2020 elections? What is different today that requires different approaches?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Excellent question. I think there's a couple of things that are different. I think that there was a far more sense of urgency in 2020 than it is in 2022. I think that's because part of it, I think, is because of the presidential election, and we had an interesting candidate that was running. I think that's part. I think that's part of it. And I think that there was this sense in 2020 when I would talk to people, folks felt kind of this impending danger. They felt this sense of kind of urgency. In 2020, I don't sense that people are feeling that same, there's a discontentment, but the same kind of sense of urgency. And that scares me. And that scares me because, quite frankly, I actually think it is, we're in a far, far more critical place right now, believe it or not, in 2022 than I felt in 2020. Because in some ways, there's some things that are becoming normalized, right? I think that when you're seeing racist tropes, that's becoming mainstream, right? To have a main political party to actually normalize the fact that the Capitol was getting ready to insurrection was taking place, that's kind of scary. To have people in elected officials to openly in 2022 take back some of the lessons and replicate some of the things that we saw in 1955, to have the Supreme Court in the land in the midst of this moment say that to strip the Voting Rights Act, that's extremely scary. And so I think the three things, if I were to think of three things, I think one, I think there's been a shift in a sense of urgency, and that's misaligned to me. That concerns me greatly. Secondly, I do think that people are, I do think that there's a such thing called voter fatigue. I think we have been in a kind of a political cauldron, for probably about 3-4 years. I don't know if any of you all were like me, but when the former administration was in office, I was glued to the TV like, what happened today? What happened today? Did anything happen today? And and we don't really recognize, I don't know if we often recognize how intense and traumatic that could be, and that experience was for many, many of us, and so we haven't really had a breather. Or I can speak for myself, as in Georgia, we didn't have a breather. We came out of 2020, we went right into a special Senate election, we went right into voter suppression immediately. So there's not been any, normally there's been kind of ebbs and flows where there's an election and then there's a little cool down time. You never completely stop working, but it has been it's been relentless. It's been a constant grind. And so that's one of the things that I think I'm trying to figure out, those moments of rest and respite in the midst of recognizing the urgency of now. I think that that's kind of a difference as well. That feels very challenging. The third thing, though, is I think that there is an awakened giant. I think young people have been politicized in a way. I think there are more people who are tuned in to politics. The challenge is that we now have social media where oftentimes people are unable or unwilling to do the work to be able to distinguish what's true and what's false. And so because of that, while I think there are far more people that are tuned in, the challenge is, what are they tuned into? And so those are some of the differences. And so I think, the way that we organize information, I think that's why in this moment, I think if there are three critical pieces. One, we need trusted messengers because there's so much misinformation. Two, I think that we need to make sure that we are supporting young leadership, that finally young people have actually eclipsed baby boomers. I'm a Generation X. We weren't able to eclipse the baby boomers, which was my mother's generation, right, who have dominated the political landscape for the last 40 years. Now there's a new generation that actually has more numbers, but they're not voting at the same rate. And so engagement, long-term engagement and creating leadership opportunities, I think that's the second thing. And I think the third thing is we're going to have to deal with democracy day to day. We can't deal with democracy like an election and democracy are the same thing. They're not. Elections is one experience and one part of democracy. And yes, we got to work around elections. But right now, what we're in right now, and my entire adult life, I don't know if I've ever felt like this, that we cannot let up on the gas at all when it comes to fighting for democracy. Post-election, pre-election, during the election, that we have to be relentless around fighting for democracy and demanding the restoration of the Voting Rights Act.
LaTosha, so well stated. There's a sense of urgency. It's a perilous time for democracy. A lot of pushback on racial justice. So with all the work you do, what gives you hope when in these times and spaces?
You know what? I wanted to say one thing, but something else has come up for me. It really is the power of the human spirit. There is nothing that has been created that can't be recreated. Nothing. You know, I talk to people around the Supreme Court, and there are people who have different opinions around that. I'm of one opinion that I believe that the Supreme Court should be restructured, right, and expanded. Not because I want, you know, this is a political party one way or the other, but at some point, you know, we literally have to have the kind of institutions that are going to serve our current existence. You know, folks will say, well, what were the founders intended? Well, the founders didn't intend for me and you, Jordan, to be here right now. Gordon, for you and I to be here right now. At a higher institution of learning, the founders didn't intend to have a community, a president who's a person of color, you know, as a major university in a college in this country. And so I'm raising that because we have to also recognize that the founders did not think every thought that could be thunk about democracy, and that may have worked for what their objective was. And there was some thinking that I think we actually can build upon. But if we're to have the kind of democracy that we want, the kind of nation we want, then we have to actually start seeing ourselves as founders of a new democracy. And so, or a new America. And I'm raising that because I think it's really important for us to really think about these institutions in different ways, for us to really expand our minds, because sometimes we will get attached to a thing and think that if we can just tweak a thing, you know, I remember, it reminds me of my first, I had a Ford Escort GT, and I tweaked that thing as much as I could. And at some point, I just had to let her go. And so I think there's some elements, you know, of our democracy that are strong, that need to be strengthened, that we can build into. But there's some things that may not serve a purpose, or actually may be working against us having the kind of inclusive democracy that we desire. Electoral college is one of those things, I think, but it's going to require us really not just focusing on we're fighting in the here and now. We literally have to be visionaries. We've got to walk and chew gum at the same time.
I'm so appreciative of this evening with you, LaTosha Brown, for all the work you've been doing, the work you are doing, and the work you will do. I'm still thinking about how you started. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. So we're going to hold on. We're going to keep our eyes on the prize. We are going to get active. I want to thank LaTosha. I want to thank Natasha. I want to thank Eduardo and Seattle University and my colleagues at United Way for such a informative and inspiring evening. I thank all of you for your thoughtful questions. These are questions that please don't just ask them here. Take them into your network, into your community, because that way you'll have your eyes on the prize. You and your colleagues and your networks will hold on, and we can aspire to that vision that LaTosha has given us tonight. One thing, of course, that'd be remiss if I didn't say so, for any of you out there who are not yet registered to vote, there's a November election. Please register. Do it as soon as you can, and encourage those in your networks to register to vote, and then make sure that you get out there and do that. Another way is to make a donation to support and empower communities of color right here in King County. Through United Ways, we have a United Ways BIPOC Community Funds. All the proceeds from tonight's event will support our Racial Equity Coalition. It will support the Black Community Building Collective, and it will support the Indigenous Communities Fund. And all of these are efforts that are part of your United Way to work toward a racially just community where all people have homes, students graduate, and families are financially stable. Amen. The funding that we raise and invest in the Racial Equity Coalition, Black Community Building Collective, and Indigenous Community Funds are used by those member organizations as how they see best. Because again, those who are closest to the challenges know the best solutions. They know how to support their communities and also in this very important time to help them with an equitable recovery and a long-term viability. So again, I ask you to please consider making a donation before you leave your computer. You can do it easily by just going to uwkc.org, and there's a donate button right there on our landing page. So again, I want to thank you for supporting this important work here in this community, supporting the work of LaTosha Brown and her colleagues in Black Voters Matters, helping support the Black girls. And this will be, we'll have these kind of conversations again a little bit in a few more months. So please stay tuned to United Way. We also like to try to make these really helpful events and conversations. So we do have an online survey, just 3 questions, if you can hang with us. And it's a multiple choice question, so it's not hard. That helps us deliver the best event. So again, to everyone here, our gratitude for joining us, our gratitude to LaTosha Brown and our sponsors, especially Seattle University. Stay active, stay safe, and let's make a difference. Keep an eye on the prize and hold on.
Hold
Thank
on.
you all.
Thank you.